Alright, so today we're going to do a short introduction on Bitcoin and what it is and how it's used. The main reason I wanted to do this was for the simple fact that Bitcoin's got to be the most misunderstood modern payment system. You have people on both sides who spread lies about it. The Bitcoin shills will tell you lies simply because they want the price to increase, and the lies they tell you, they really don't. The lies they tell you aren't because they are trying to lie to you, it's because they don't understand what Bitcoin is. It's a very complex thing. And then the other people who lie about it are the Bitcoin naysayers who say it's like the tulip mania, there's no value to it, people are spending their money on absolutely nothing. Both of these camps are completely wrong. And the reason that they're wrong is simply because they just don't understand it. It's a complex issue. And if you don't understand it, you're just going to say a lot of stupid things that won't make a whole lot of sense. So if you watch this video, don't expect to become an expert on Bitcoin. You can study it for days and still not be an expert. However, I want you to know enough so that if the topic of Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies gets brought up at a dinner party, you'll understand it enough so that you won't look like an idiot if you're talking about it. So before we get started, you need to understand the three different components of Bitcoin, and you need to understand that the lexicon for Bitcoin is it's a little unevolved at this point, and it's like when the internet first came out, people had a lot of trouble using the word internet in a sentence. They would call it just internet without saying the word the in front of it, or they'd make it plural when it wasn't supposed to be, and it was just hard to use grammatically in a sentence. So Bitcoin is currently in that state right now, and a lot of people don't use it correctly when they use the word in a sentence. So I'm going to sort of elaborate on the different aspects of Bitcoin and the Bitcoin lingo that you need to know, the three components of it that you need to know. The first component of Bitcoin that you need to know is Bitcoins. This is plural. Whenever someone refers to Bitcoins in the plural sense, they're talking about the spendable currency, what actually is traded for money, things that people use to make money if they're investing. And remember, that is Bitcoins plural. Now, if you talk about Bitcoin in the singular sense, you're talking about the Bitcoin protocol and the Bitcoin network. You're talking about the whole thing all together. So Bitcoin plural is the money, Bitcoin singular, that's the network, that's the protocol, that's the whole thing in total. And then finally, the third part that you need to know is the blockchain. Now, the Bitcoin blockchain is the ledger behind Bitcoin that records all the transactions that have ever happened. So just so you know, you can actually look at the blockchain and you can trace every transaction that has ever happened since the beginning of time. And that's really what legitimizes Bitcoin and gives it security, is the blockchain. So those are the three components. So now let's talk about that first component, Bitcoins themselves. What are Bitcoins and what do they offer? So Bitcoins are the spendable currency. And what I mean by that is you can buy and sell Bitcoins for money. You can offer labor services for Bitcoins. A lot of the people who actually work on Bitcoin itself, this is actually what they do. They will offer their services for the Bitcoin Foundation and they get paid in Bitcoin. So Bitcoins themselves are just spendable currency. Next, Bitcoins have low transaction fees when you send and receive them. When it first came out, it was close to zero transaction fees, and a lot of people would say that Bitcoins have zero transaction fees. Well, this is a lie. And anyone who said that in the beginning of the evolution and history of Bitcoin was either lying or very misinformed, because due to the nature of the protocol of Bitcoin, it's always been known that the transaction fees would rise above zero, and they're going to basically stay there from now on. I'm not saying the transaction fees are high. Generally speaking, they're much lower than using a debit card or a credit card or anything of that nature, but the transaction fees are not zero. They're just close to zero, so just always remember that. Next, we have smart contracts, and that's an attribute. That's something that Bitcoin has to offer, is a smart contract. Now, a lot of people don't really understand what that means, but a smart contract simply means it's a method of having the Bitcoin code itself decide when to release payments as long as a certain number of parameters have been met. So this is very helpful in legal scenarios, because a lot of times you have to have a lawyer come in and make sure a bunch of obligations have been met for different contracts before payment can be made. Well, Bitcoin allows you to do this through the code itself. Now, this doesn't eliminate the need for lawyers. It just makes it a lot easier, and it makes it a lot cheaper to do. So, for example, one of the most common smart contracts currently in use for Bitcoins are what is called the multi-signature contract. Now, multi-signature works basically like this, and we're going to use an example of someone buying a house, and we'll use what is called a 2 of 3 multi-signature contract. So in a 2 of 3 multi-signature contract, if you're buying a house, and the 3 parties involved would be you, the buyer, the seller of the house, and then the intermediary. Let's just call them the escrow. So in this scenario, you have a contract with the seller, and so long as you meet all the obligations of the contract, you will be able to buy the house. But let's say you're working with sort of a shady guy who's trying to sell you the house, so you get this intermediary to ensure that so long as you come up and you meet all the obligations of the contract, you'll be able to get the house. So you put it in an escrow account with Bitcoin. So with the 2 of 3 Bitcoin escrow account, what would happen is that so long as 2 of the 3 parties involved agree that you have met all of your obligations, they can sign off, and then this will release the funds. So let's say you're trying to buy the house from the guy, and he really just doesn't want you to have the house, but you've met all the contractual obligations, so he's trying to cheat you out of your house. And so you just go up to the escrow entity and you say, look, I've met all the obligations, I need you to sign off on this because that's my house now according to the contract. And they would look at the contract, and if you would have met all the obligations, then the Bitcoins would get sent to that person. And so there's no way for them to get out of this. They can't say, oh, well, I never got the money. They got the money. And so smart contracts are just a way to enforced basically contract law in an interesting new way, I guess. It's all done through smart technology rather than having to go through a person. Obviously, this doesn't eliminate the need for legal entities, and for an escrow for buying a house. Obviously, that's a very complex thing. There's more that you can do or more things that you can do that are less complex, but that's just one scenario that smart contracts work. And like I said, multi-signature is already in use in Bitcoin. People do it all the time. So below that we have privacy and pseudonymity. It's kind of a mouthful there. But Bitcoins are very privacy-centric. They're a very private currency. A lot of people will tell you it's completely untraceable. That's a complete lie. The one thing about Bitcoins that they offer is they offer pseudonymity rather than complete privacy. Now, complete privacy would mean you don't know who sends money to and where, and that would be very problematic for businesses. What Bitcoin offers is pseudonymity. So anyone can go and look and see what money's being moved where. You just don't know who's doing it unless you do a little digging. Now, generally speaking, if you're just a private person, the only way you'll know who is if somebody tells you. So you could say like, that was actually me who moved 5 Bitcoins during the last block. And you can see it right here. Here's my wallet address, and you could go look it up. Just for those people who are worried about the sort of criminal side of this, people always say that Bitcoins are just a haven for criminals. That's not true. It's actually, cash is actually, like cold hard cash, the US dollar is more private than Bitcoins. So Bitcoins are pseudonymous, so if there's any sort of criminal investigation, you can actually do the work and figure out who is who, but you have to do the work. So one reason a lot of people like this is it forces the government to actually obey its own privacy laws, which it doesn't do anymore. So just remember, it is very private. It's not completely private, and the correct term for it actually is it's pseudonymous. The next thing is that Bitcoins are very easy to access. All you need is an internet connection. And technically speaking, once you have a wallet, you don't even necessarily need a Bitcoin, or not a Bitcoin connection. You don't need an internet connection because you can take your wallet offline. So where this really has a lot of chances for new opportunities and new businesses in third world countries or undeveloped continents such as Africa. In Africa, almost everyone has a smartphone, and if they have smartphones, they can use Bitcoin. However, almost no one in Africa has access to modern banking systems. So Bitcoins have a great opportunity for growth in places like Africa because they're easy to access. And then finally, Bitcoins have an error-free ledger. That error-free ledger, like I said before, that is called the blockchain. This ledger has never made a mistake. And for all intents and purposes, it cannot make a mistake. If you know a lot about Bitcoin, you know that's technically not accurate to say that it cannot make a mistake, but the scenarios involved in forcing it to make a mistake through what is known as a hack in the network of Bitcoin. You can do that, but it's very limited what you could do. So someone could try and hack the Bitcoin network, but it would cost them tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, and they might be able to profit a few $1,000s off of it. So there's literally no reason to. It's a complete waste and be completely retarded. And then after, an hour or two after the hack, Bitcoin could revert back to what it was before, and nothing would have changed. So there's really no reason to hack it. You don't gain anything out of it, and it doesn't really hurt the network anyway. So when people talk about can Bitcoin be hacked, technically yes, but even if it were, whoever hacked it would lose a huge amount of money. It would be completely obvious who did it, and they wouldn't stand to gain anything. So that's why it's never been hacked before. It's never made an error, and you can basically say truthfully that Bitcoin's ledger cannot make mistakes because it can't. It really just can't, just the way it's designed. And we're not going to go fully into all those details here today, but let's go ahead and move on to what Bitcoin is, what the Bitcoin protocol and network is, and how it's different from other cryptocurrencies. So the first thing to notice about Bitcoin is that it's peer-to-peer, and what that means is that it's not controlled by any central authority. So one reason why this is a big issue is that every currency that has been controlled by a central authority has failed because of the stupidity of the people who controlled it. You can set up a perfect currency, but so long as it's controlled by some central authority, due to the law of large numbers, eventually some idiot's going to get in there and ruin it. So Bitcoin can't be controlled by a single entity, so that can never happen. That's not to say that Bitcoin's price will never hit zero. It could potentially in the future. I would make the case that 1,000 years from now, no one's going to be using Bitcoin, but that's way in the future, so it's not something you have to worry about. And if Bitcoin's price hits zero, it's not going to be because some idiot gained control of it and ruined it. That's completely impossible. Next, the Bitcoin transactions themselves are secured through a process called mining. Now, mining is one of the most complex aspects to Bitcoin, and almost no one really understands it. And by that, I just mean they don't understand what mining is and what it does. But to just give you a short example of it, a short summary, every 10 minutes, all Bitcoin transactions that have happened in that 10 minutes are processed by Bitcoin miners, and when they're processed, all that means is that each miner is working on a very hard math problem, and when they come up with the answer to the math problem, all the Bitcoin nodes send their transactions to him, and they are all aggregated by the miner, and then the miner sends all the transactions back to all the Bitcoin nodes who verify his work for accuracy. And when this happens, the miner is rewarded with Bitcoins. Right now, any miner who mines a block, they're rewarded with 12.5 Bitcoins. So there's a monetary incentive for these miners, and the reason for this mining, and the reason why they have a super hard math problem, in order for you to figure out the block and in order for you to record the transactions, is that's what secures the network. So in order to hack the network, you have to be the first one to figure out the answer to that block or to that super hard math problem. And so it takes huge amounts of resources to do that, and that's why they're rewarded with Bitcoin. So that's in order to offset the resources that they use to figure out the super hard math problem. But again, they have to send these transactions back to all the nodes, and it has to get verified, and they have to do this, otherwise the node or the block will not get accepted. And so the Bitcoin mining, if you really want to understand Bitcoin, look into that in detail, and I hope to come out with a video explaining that later on. But it is the Bitcoin mining that secures Bitcoin itself, and that's really the holy grail of all cryptocurrencies, is Bitcoin mining itself. You can almost tell whether or not a new cryptocurrency will succeed based on how the cryptocurrency is mined. A lot of them failed because the people who made them didn't understand the mining process or how the incentives work in order to secure the network. And that's what I mean when I say most people don't understand Bitcoin mining, is that it's just a really complex thing, and you have to understand a lot of different aspects of cryptocurrencies and money in general in order to create a valid mining system. And the Bitcoin mining system is very solid. It's just about the best in the business. Next, Bitcoin transactions are recorded in public blockchains to verify their accuracy. That's also a part of this mining process. So, like I said before, every 10 minutes, all the Bitcoin transactions are aggregated in a single block, and these blocks go back all the way to the beginning of Bitcoin itself. The first Bitcoin block is called the Genesis block, and you can literally go back through each block and see all the transactions to see how all the Bitcoins moved from different wallets to the next wallet, and you can look at it, and that's how you guarantee it's accurate. Another thing about this system is that the farther back you go, the farther back you go, the more sure you are of the accuracy of them. Like I said, it's super hard to hack Bitcoin, but if you go back something like 10 blocks in Bitcoin, in order for someone to have hacked 10 blocks, and each block comes out every 10 minutes, so that's only 100 minutes, but in order to hack 10 blocks with a probability of over 50%, you have to have hundreds to thousands of times more mining power than the rest of all the other miners in Bitcoin. And as we're going to discuss later, that's almost impossible to do. So when people say Bitcoin is the most secure payment system, this is why. It's because of the blockchain and the mining process. Next, Bitcoin can be used both online and offline. Although you need to have an internet connection at some point when you use Bitcoin, you can have offline wallets and store money in offline wallets. This is the most secure way to do it, because a wallet that is offline, it literally cannot be used. And so as long as the wallet is offline, it's completely secure. No money can go out of it. And then you have to put it back online in order for it to for the money in it to be spent. So that's one way that you can really secure your Bitcoins, is by taking your Bitcoin wallet offline. And then finally, on this left side here, Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. Now, there's multiple reasons why they're irreversible. The main reason is to ensure that basically the Bitcoin protocol works smoothly. If they could be reversible, it would cause problems with what is called double spending, where someone would spend Bitcoin once and then reverse the transaction, then spend them again. A lot of people don't like the idea of having irreversible money transactions, just because what if you screw up and send money to the wrong person? And while that is a serious issue, what you need to understand is you can write protocols above this code. So you could create your own separate Bitcoin network. You wouldn't call it Bitcoin. Let's say we call it Bitcoin Prime, and you run that over the top of your Bitcoin. So you could have people actually spend Bitcoin Prime, and Bitcoin Prime could be reversible. And then there's just some sort of protocol for when, like a certain time delay after Bitcoin Prime payments are made, that you would actually send the Bitcoins themselves. So while Bitcoins themselves are not reversible, this is something that you can easily create an app on top of the Bitcoin network to make the Bitcoin payments reversible themselves, and this really wouldn't be any sort of problem at all. The only reason why this doesn't exist right now is because Bitcoin is sort of in its infancy. It really hasn't been out for very long, so that's the only reason why the Bitcoin transactions as of right now are not reversible. Next, on the right side, the total supply of Bitcoins are capped at 21 million. This is very important because as it stands right now, any idiot in charge of the Federal Reserve can just inflate the US dollar into nothingness. That'll never happen with Bitcoins. It's literally in the protocol that there will only ever be 21 million. So that is set in stone, and that will never change. Again, this is very useful for any business or entrepreneur using Bitcoins, because they know they don't have to worry about fluctuations in the supply of money that would ruin their business. Next below that is that Bitcoin's pseudonymous. We touched on this before. That just means it's very private. Like I said, You can figure out who is who in the Bitcoin network, but it takes a lot of resources and energy. So if you really needed to find out, like let's say there's some sort of criminal that you really needed to find, you can find them, but it makes it hard. So it's the best of both worlds. You are private when using Bitcoin, but if someone needs to find who you are because you're a nefarious person, then they can. The next point is a very interesting point, and that's the total computing power of Bitcoin is estimated as being 10,000 to 100,000 times more powerful than the computing power at Google. Now, Google doesn't publicly release their computing power, so you can only estimate how much more powerful the Bitcoin network is than Google. But just think about how much computing power Google needs to run what they do. They've got an incredible business going on, but they're not even close to the computing power behind Bitcoin. So when I said before, you need a huge amount of computing power in order to even pretend like you could hack Bitcoin, this is what I mean. Like you would need 10 to 100,000 times more power to even try to hack Bitcoin, and even then you won't be able to hack it for more than 10 minutes if you're super lucky. So it's stupid retarded how difficult it is to hack Bitcoin. So when people say, they're kind of afraid of a digital currency, I can understand that, but Bitcoin is incredibly secure. And finally, Bitcoin was the first real cryptocurrency, so it's got a bit of a novelty factor to it. If you really understand the intricacies of Bitcoin, you'll understand that there are certain weaknesses and flaws that could be improved upon, but generally speaking, other cryptocurrencies that come out and try to solve these flaws, they won't reach the same market capitalization, or they won't attract as many investors as Bitcoin because these flaws are so little, and Bitcoin has that novelty factor to it. Just so you know, one of these flaws would be the fact that the decimal point in Bitcoin, it uses something like 64 digits, if I remember correctly, and the decimal point is put smack dab in the middle, and that could sort of cause issues later on. It really wouldn't cause any sort of big issues, but it's just a slight weakness. So when I say there are weaknesses in Bitcoin, I'm talking about slight weaknesses, and most of them are aesthetic weaknesses that don't really affect its function, but I might go over those in the future. But because Bitcoin was the first cryptocurrency to come out with, you don't really have to worry about those because it's not going to be overtaken by somebody who comes out with new sort of Bitcoin that just basically changes one small aspect to it. And that's been evidenced just by its complete dominance of the cryptocurrency market. Other cryptocurrencies don't even come close in their market capitalization compared to Bitcoin. So next we're going to look at how the blockchain works. This is the third component of Bitcoin, as we stated earlier, is the blockchain. And this little diagram we have here, it doesn't really explain itself very well, but what's going on here is there's 100,000 Satoshis. Now Satoshis that's the term for the smallest unit of Bitcoins, but I'm just going to not call them Satoshis. I'm going to call them Bitcoins. Let's assume there's 100,000 Bitcoins first going into that first transaction, TX0. That's going to be our first wallet. And for anyone who's really good with Bitcoin, you'll understand my terminology is not exactly accurate, but that's just because I'm trying to simplify this for your average person so you understand what's going on here. So in the diagram above, or that's shown here, we're going to have 100,000 Bitcoins going into the first wallet, and then after that we're going to keep moving Bitcoins into new wallets, but we're going to leave 10,000 in the first, or in each wallet. So we're going to move all but 10,000 out of each wallet. So you've got 100,000 Bitcoins in the first wallet. We're moving 40,000 out from TX0 to TX1, 50,000 out to TX2, so that leaves 10,000 in TX0. Then from TX1, you've got 40,000 in there. We're going to move 30,000 out to TX3. That leaves 10,000 in TX1. In TX2, there is 50,000 coming from TX0. We're putting 20,000 in TX4 and 20,000 in TX5. And then from TX3, there's going to have to be 20,000 being spent out somewhere to leave only 10,000 in there. And then TX4 and TX5 are each putting 10,000 into TX6, which will put 20,000 in TX6, meaning you'll have to spend 10,000 out of that wallet to leave only 10,000 in there. So if you really want to kind of understand how the blockchain works, you have to remember that in each block, and each little column here is going to be a block. Each block records all the transactions that happened during that block. So you can go back and you can look at this. So if you were looking at the blockchain, this is what you would see, and you would see, okay, well, we first had 100,000 bitcoins in TX0, and you can trace them where they went, and you can do the math and figure out, okay, we still got 10,000 left in TX0, and you can see where all of them went. So if you kind of want to understand how the blockchain works, this diagram's a good diagram for it. And then if we just go over my bullet points here, the blockchain itself, it's public. So like I said, anyone can look at this, and that's just to verify its accuracy. So anyone who thinks, well, what if someone's stealing my money, or what if the money's not actually there? Well, you can go check the blockchain, and the blockchain verifies its accuracy. The second bullet point just says that the blockchain cannot make mistakes. Anytime you send bitcoins to a wallet, they go there, period. The blockchain doesn't make mistakes. That's not to say that you can't make a mistake as a user. You could send bitcoin to the wrong wallet, and like I said, you could create apps for this that would have things working over the top of the Bitcoin protocol that you could actually have reversible Bitcoin transactions. It wouldn't actually be Bitcoin transactions. You'd be using some other type of cryptocurrency over the top, and then later on you would just send the Bitcoins. But so the blockchain doesn't make mistakes, and a lot of this is because it's not reversible. But that's just the way it is right now. So you don't have to worry about the blockchain itself. You have to worry about yourself when you're using Bitcoin. And then finally, the blockchain enables smart contracts. And what I said before, that's just the multi-signature. So let's say one of these transactions actually was a multi-signature transaction. All that means is that there would be a certain number of parties, and in our 2 of 3 example that we used earlier, if you have 2 of the 3 parties sign it, then the bitcoins get sent. And so that's just what smart contracts are in Bitcoin. Now, again, multi-signature is not the only way to have a smart contract, but it's the main one being used at the current time. And then finally, we're going to talk about what Bitcoin is not. Now, this will tell you more of how Bitcoin took off, because even if you know all of the stuff that I just said before, you'll still ask yourself, well, how the hell did Bitcoin get so goddamn popular? Why is it that 1 Bitcoin is basically reaching parity with 1 ounce of gold? I mean, that's kind of nuts if you think about it. And so you have to know what Bitcoin is not in order to understand how it attracted such of a cult following, to say the least, because basically a lot of the people who love Bitcoin, it's almost like they're in some sort of cult for it. First off, Bitcoin is not controlled by a central bank. A lot of the first adopters of Bitcoin, they're libertarians, people who absolutely hate central banking. A lot of them bring up the fact that central banking is one of the things that communists want in order to establish communism. And so it's a lot of freedom lovers who got into Bitcoin because it's not controlled by a central bank. It's peer-to-peer, as we stated earlier. So there's no central authority that can totally screw it up. The second bullet point, Bitcoin's not and it cannot be artificially inflated. So there's no central figurehead who can just decide, you know what, instead of paying my bills with real money, I'm just going to print off a bunch of new Bitcoins and just pay my bills like that. You can't do that with Bitcoin. You can do it with the US dollar, and you can almost guarantee at some point some idiot's going to get in charge of the Federal Reserve and decide to inflate everybody's money down to nothing. But with Bitcoin, you don't have to worry about that at all. And then again, Bitcoin's not under the control of inept politicians and bureaucrats. That kind of goes into the last one. But there's been tens of thousands of fiat currencies that have existed since the beginning of time, and the only ones that have succeeded are the ones that are currently in existence, and most of the ones that are currently in existence have only existed for half of a century. So most fiat currencies have a lifetime of about 50 to 100 years. It kind of depends. And just so you know, the modern US dollar, it's changed form multiple times. Last time it changed form was under Nixon when he took the US off the gold standard. And so the US dollar as it now stands has only been in existence for about 50 years, which means we're about due for it to fail again. But that's just another aspect of why people trust Bitcoin over things like the US dollar and fiat currencies, is because fiat currencies have an incredible failure rate. Less than 1% of fiat currencies that have ever existed are successful. The rest of them have failed, and the only reason the ones that are currently successful have not failed is because they haven't been around that long. I think the longest fiat currency or the longest time of existence for a fiat currency currently in existence is the Great Britain's pound. I think that's been around for a few centuries, which that's absolutely nuts for a lifetime for a fiat currency. But other than that, they usually don't last very long. So that's why people kind of like Bitcoin, is because there's no stupid politician or bureaucrat who can ruin it. Next, there's no welfare system tied to the Bitcoin monetary system. Now, a lot of people might not like the way that sounds, just because there's not necessarily anything fundamentally or morally wrong with being supported by welfare. The only problem with the U.S. dollar's welfare system is that it's institutionalized. And what I mean by that is that people are literally legally entitled to the welfare, and because it's a fiat system, people don't actually pay these people on welfare. It's just money created out of nothing. They just type some digits into a computer, and voila, you've got new money. And so that money can be used to pay off people on welfare. Well, the problem with this is that people on welfare, by definition, are not productive, and so it's literally institutionalized to, in at least the U.S. dollar system, to create non-productive activities in the monetary system. Now, the reason why this is important is because monetary systems fail when they do not create more than they cost to use. So if the welfare system that is institutionalized in the U.S. dollar, if that gets too big, it'll literally kill the U.S. dollar and make the U.S. dollar's value drop to zero. A lot of people like to say that it is the inflation that kills off a currency, and that's false, because even under the most incredible inflation circumstances, businesses can still make money. They have to be very creative, and they have to have incredibly talented entrepreneurs, but no matter what the inflation rate is or the deflation rate, businesses can still make money. However, if the monetary system is tied to a welfare system, then if the welfare system gets too big, it doesn't matter how much the businesses do, the monetary system will not be able to create value just because there's such a drain due to the welfare itself. Next, the Bitcoin does not have a fractional reserve system. This one's kind of an iffy thing to say, only because Bitcoin doesn't have a fractional reserve system, and that's only because of the early adopters. A lot of the early adopters, like I said before, they were libertarians, freedom-loving people, and those people hate fractional reserve systems. You could create a fractional reserve sort of banking system using Bitcoin, but that just currently doesn't exist. Next, the Bitcoin account can't be easily frozen by the IRS. One thing that people understand now that they didn't understand in the past, this really came to light under the Obama presidency, is that the IRS has been heavily politicized. So if you say the wrong things politically, you can have your bank accounts frozen, and they can steal all your money, and they can basically kill you without you being able to do anything about it. Bitcoin itself, they have to have physical access to the hard drive that the Bitcoins are stored on, and they have to have your password in order to get to the Bitcoins. So it's super hard for any sort of IRS agency or agent to freeze your Bitcoin accounts. And so that's actually a big deal, especially as the United States moves towards totalitarianism. It's something you should really pay attention to. I'm not trying to say that you should avoid taxes. That's a real stupid thing to do. You'll get arrested for that, and they'll find you even if you're using Bitcoins. But the fact that the IRS is becoming heavily politicized should really worry people, and so you can have Bitcoins and not have to worry about the IRS freezing them because you said the wrong thing, and that's a really good thing about Bitcoin. Next, Bitcoin accounts can't be easily taxed. A lot of people, again, are going to say, oh, you're telling people not to pay taxes. No, I am not saying that at all. But if you look back at the way taxes were originally gathered by the United States government, people had to actually say, this is how much money I made, here, take my taxes. Now when you go to pay taxes, you're actually just getting rebates. They've already taxed you. You're just seeing if you get any money back or not. So the reason why this is important is because in the past, when they had to ask you to pay, obviously, if the entire populace felt like they weren't getting their money's worth from the government, they would be pissed off and they would try and do something about it. So whether you're a progressive who likes high government spending or a fiscal conservative who basically wants the government to do absolutely nothing, you're getting screwed over in the current system. So progressives, you pay a lot in taxes, but you don't get anything from your government. You know this. And then conservatives, you pay a lot in taxes, and you didn't want to pay taxes in the first place. So you're both getting screwed over. If they had to actually ask you for it, then they would be forced to offer you something in return. Otherwise, they would basically have to expect that people would not be paying taxes. And currently, they're screwing everybody over because taxes are automatically taken out of the system. And then next, Bitcoin accounts are not accessible by the government. As it stands right now, the government has records of all your monetary activities, and that's nuts. George Orwell would be spinning in his grave if he knew about this. Like, they literally know absolutely everything you've ever done with your money, and that should never happen. If you look at the way that banks originally were run, they were completely private. The government had no access to any records under almost any circumstances. And although people will say, well, then what would criminals do? Well, just look in the past. Like, America was literally built on a banking system that was centered around privacy. So obviously it's not that bad of a system. So that's just another aspect of Bitcoin that makes it very popular. But anyways, I hope after this video you have a better understanding of what Bitcoin is, what it is not, and so that if anybody ever talks to you about it, you can kind of talk back to them and not seem like a complete idiot.